Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of our program. This is Mike Saunders with Marketing Huddle, and today we're privileged to have with us Dave Fries, who is the founder of Success Technologies. Dave, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Hey, welcome, and I love the wording Success Technologies because a technology is not necessarily electronics or an app. A technology can be a technique, and so I love how you phrased that your firm's name, Success Technologies. So give us a little bit of background on what brought you to that entrepreneurial point of starting Success Technologies and what that entails.
Well, I'm a lawyer by training, but before that, before I even went to law school, I was trained as an interrogator, and those maybe sound like two different things, although I know people would say, no, they're the same to me.
Yeah.
But in both of those jobs, I really learned how people processed language and how they made decisions and how they decided whether they were going to trust you or not and what the limits of that trust were. And so I became really fascinated with that. I noticed that in both of those jobs, having that skill made those jobs much, much easier, made me better at them. Because I'm a trust and estates attorney, so I have to find out what people own and what it's worth and what they're worried about with their kids and their spouses. And so it's emotionally very complex, and then you have to lay all this tax stuff over it, feed it back, and make sure they understand. So becoming a really skilled negotiator and a really skilled communicator early on in my career was super helpful to me. And I talk a lot about force multipliers. And it's a concept we've taken from the military and said, what are the things that we can do, the technologies that we can apply, the techniques, the strategies we can use that take what we already have and make it way more powerful and way more effective and way more leveraged. And in a way, communication skills are the ultimate force multiplier. They make you better at everything. So once I sort of became consciously aware of that, I would fly out to speak to conferences and conventions on the weekends on issues of persuasion and influence. And I found that once people employed them in their marketing and employed them in their personal lives and employed them in how they work with and manage and lead people, that they got better. So that's what caused me to form that separate little company. And we publish these kinds of ideas, and I still speak on them. And I just get constant feedback from people that said learning this really changed my life. So that gives me great pleasure.
Yeah, I love that foundation because you brought, it sounds like, some military background to some legal background to now let's just land that plane and make the boots on the ground people that are trying to implement it day after day in their business or their life or their corporate career. There's so many things you can learn from that. And I love that intro. Let's do a little bit deeper on force multipliers. What would be one example of a force multiplier that you would be training or teaching on?
Sure. So I should say that I've always been a civilian. I've been blessed to work with folks in almost every branch of our military service, and I have the deepest respect for them. And the concept of force multipliers, I really learned from my contact with the military and in programs where we were, educating people that had served in the military or were active duty. An example in the military of a force multiplier might be something like night vision. Or having drone technology, which gives you a major advantage because you can see the enemy when no one else can see you. And so if you get to choose your battlefield, which is at night, and you have drones and individuals with night vision, that could be a very, very, very powerful force multiplier. A small force of 4 or 5 well-trained soldiers or operators might be able to defeat a much, much larger force when they have access to that sort of force multiplication. But optimism is viewed as a force multiplier. So when we hired, General Colin Powell said that optimism, an attitude, was the ultimate force multiplier. And so, when we take that into the civilian realm, when we're looking to hire people on our teams or when we're looking to do training, we should always be looking to do things to hire optimistic people and to do things in a way that maintain optimism, for example. So there's a very, very simple example. A little bit more complicated example would be understanding the idea that a lot of times when we're talking to people and they say, no, I can't do something, not only are they probably not optimistic, but they might be afraid that if they're trying to do something they have to do, they could fail. So typically in roles of leadership or even in parenting, when we ask somebody to do something or we ask a child to do something that we know is good for them or important or has to be done, and they say, no, I can't, we want to be supportive, so we say, yes, you can. But saying yes, you can means we're arguing with them. They just told us they can't, so they go inside and they come up with all the reasons that they are right and you're wrong. And that's like starting
and they're digging their heels in at that point.
Disagree with. Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of like when you were mentioning that, I thought of, I've heard in some sales training before where if you say to someone, hey, how would this work? Whatever that question might be, and they say, well, I don't know. And you could either just be stopped right there, or you could say, well, if you did know, how would that work? And it's almost like just that one question there makes them kind of go, I don't know. Or it's kind of like when you say, hey, do you have a referral for me? The answer is yes or no. Or if you said, who do you know who has a business who needs, now all of a sudden their mind is at least thinking a little bit deeper. So I love that concept of force multiplier, and attitude is just a really big multiplier because as we know in the world of self-development, positive thinking, you could wake up and say, what a horrible day today will be, and somehow, some way, you're going to find out things that are going to be a little bit not positive. But if you start off the day with, what a great day to be alive, you're going to be predisposed to looking for some positive things.
Absolutely. And attitude and open-mindedness are major force multipliers. There's also a dichotomy to a lot of these things in leadership and in marketing. So, for example, you have to exhibit confidence, but you have to stop the ego from making you feel like you know everything that's going on because your frontline troops, whether they're people that are answering the phone or meeting with clients or developing sales materials, they may know stuff that you don't know. So when you're announcing, a new effort and what you're going to do and why you're going to do it, you have to be confident and you have to lead. But the moment you don't allow questions and the moment you don't allow objections and the moment you stop listening to the reasons why somebody might want to do it a different way, that's a potential catastrophe. So it is really complicated. It's not easy. We all wish it were easier, but for people that are just willing to spend a little bit of time on it and learning to listen more effectively and learning techniques for maintaining confidence but in balance with keeping that ego out of the way, can make those kind of little attitude changes can make a big difference. Even like the example you gave is when you wake up in the morning and you say something optimistic like it's a great day to be alive. There are plenty of studies that say the person that does that and that journals and that notes all the things that are happy, they have a happier, better day for the most part. But if somebody wakes up and says specifically, I wonder how today could be better than yesterday, I want to notice everything that goes on that helps me to move toward my goal or whatever it is that they're working on. Those people that ask themselves specific questions activate the reticular activator, and they find more and they notice more of those things. And so these studies show that they're even happier than the person that goes, damn, it's just good to be alive.
And I'm interested and happy you used that phrase reticular activator because I use it all the time, and so many people kind of look at me like, what? And it is so important in business, but in life too. And the way I explain it to people is, hey, you know what kind of car you drive? And when you first got that one and you noticed all the other ones just like it on the road, you're like, hey, there's our car. And it's like they were always there. You just weren't predisposed to seeing them, and now you are. So how can we use a reticular activator kind of a programming to make sure that we have success in our business and our life and our whatever? And many times it is going to be something like when you have a meeting with a prospective client and you say, let me tell you something, what we're about to talk about here has been proven over and over in years and years to have, this and this and this success. And what I've done is I've distilled this down into your specific situation. So I want to show you something that's just really going to blow you away. Now, is it going to blow them away and they're walking around, jumping up and down, going Yahoo? Maybe not, but they're kind of watching with bated breath going, let's just see how this is. You're setting the stage. And I love reticular activator. Now, here's what I want to bring up. when you were mentioning the force multiplier of attitude, it made me think of the concept of expert positioning, authority positioning as it relates to like persuasion and selling. And one of my passions, and I'm finishing a book right now called Authority Selling, which is how you can use your authority position, whatever that might be. It might be, hey, I wrote a book, I wrote some articles, I was interviewed on, but you're using that in your interactions with prospects and clients ahead of the meeting or after the meeting to help take that, force multiplier to say, we had this meeting or I made this pitch. Well, that's fine. But if you can use that force multiplier and say, during or before or after that meeting, I integrated in some of why you should trust me and some of the proof why you should trust me with my authority position, now doesn't that really amplify that potential?
It does, and a lot of times in an interview, I'll have somebody lead with the fact that Steve Forbes reviewed a book I wrote and said I was a grandmaster of persuasion skills. I'll have them say that I've been on PBS and NPR and Fox, which lets me say something funny like, yeah, that just proves that I can aggravate people at both ends of the political spectrum with NPR, PBS. But what I'm doing, as you observe, is giving people reasons to position me in their own mind as somebody that's worth listening to. And again, you have to be careful of that. I often start with a little bit of positioning like that, but saying, look, this thing that we're going to talk about is also not for everyone, and there are 2 or 3 flaws. But we're going to talk about those as we go, because if that means it's not a match for you, then it's not a match for you. But for some people that we work with, these flaws don't matter at all. And these incredible and amazing things that it can do matter a great deal. So we're going to find out if that's true for you or not. And I'm sure you can.
And those right there, you're using some techniques of like transparency, some scarcity, and now all of a sudden, and the takeaway, it might not be right for you. And they're going, well, maybe it is. Let me in. That's really awesome. I love that. So force multiplier, excellent, awesome. I think that I love that concept. It made me think too. I recently interviewed a guest that works with celebrity sponsorships. So they will almost take the concept of if you go to book an airline flight and you pay full fare, that's because the airline wanted to sell you that ticket. But if they've got open seats or like a hotel, open rooms, and you want to book last minute, they just want to fill that. So they're going to give you a better price. So what this company does is they do that with sponsorships. And the example they gave is, you can get your logo on the sleeve of XYZ major golfer on the U.S. Open on TV, and it's going to cost a pretty penny. But if 2 weekends before the event, they've got a little slot open on whatever, their sponsorship is, you can get a really good deal on that, and they specialize in getting these little-known brands on some big-name stages at kind of like those rock-bottom prices. So I would suspect that celebrity sponsorships could also be a force multiplier.
Absolutely, and I'll tell you how I would use it. That's brilliant, by the way. I'm going to go back and search your archives and find that episode because I'm going to hire that guy. But
I'll shoot you an email too, so you can listen to that.
But here's how I would use it. And I think this is how entrepreneurs sometimes get misguided or disappointed by those things. They think that by having their name on the sleeve of that golfer that they're going to get this amazing result. And that's rarely the case standing alone. But that gives you the ability to do what you were talking about and begin to position yourself differently. You can post that on social media. You can thank the celebrity for, taking your word out to people. There are all sorts of things that you could do after that. So for me, getting Steve Forbes to review a book that I wrote was a major coup, not because standing alone it sold more books, but it then infused everything that we did around promoting that book, which still sells to this day, and I think I wrote it in 2004. So, so using that kind of celebrity sponsorship really does – It triggers a couple of things in people. Celebrities are rare, and there's this evolutionary biological reaction that we have to very successful people, and then it's compounded when they have celebrity, and it kind of alerts people and changes the neurotransmitter mix a little bit. It goes to those issues of scarcity, and it goes to those issues of popularity and being part of a tribe and having membership and ownership and things.
Yeah.
So using celebrity, very powerful. I love that idea. I'm going to use it.
Awesome. Hey, have you ever heard of Stanley Milgram?
Nope, doesn't ring a bell, but I'm sure I should.
Kind of a old, probably 50s, 60s American social psychologist, and he is known for discovering kind of a lot of things. But one concept is the marketplace will blindly believe the words of an expert. And your idea, and then there's another kind of Zipf's law. ZIPF is another researcher who said your ideal clients intentionally narrow their choices to those who are on top. So people are busy. They're texting. They're getting instant messages, and they don't have time to research 428 different options. They're going to Google, or they're going to look around for something, and they're going to see who's on top, and then they're going to believe those people that are perceived as experts. And I had an interview guest once that was immigrated from Israel, and he said he needed an immigration attorney, and he looked around and got a referral to some one of his friends said, hey, talk to this attorney. They give free sessions, and he's like, good. And then he looked around, and he saw this one attorney in town was going to give a keynote and had written a book. So he goes to the speech and books a time with that attorney, paid $100 or $200, whatever the larger fee was, instead of free, and hired that person. And he goes, I then kind of retraced in my mind and was like, I trusted this because he was speaking and had a book. So he intentionally narrowed the choices to those that were on top because he perceived that person as an expert. And it is so important in our persuasion, in our interactions. How can we come off as authoritative, not condescending, talking down like I know everything, but just confident?
Well, a couple of things are lurking in there, what you said. One is this was an immigration attorney and was probably speaking and wrote the book specifically on a topic or subtopic of immigration. And so some of the smartest people I know agree that going narrower, at least when you're starting a business, and oftentimes even when you have established businesses and you're going to roll out a new product, very narrow niching makes it easier to penetrate into those markets and makes it easier to persuade because typically find out we have a certain kind of person, they're male or female, they're a certain age, the smaller the universe of the niche, and they have a language that it's pretty easy for us to ferret out and how they talk about it. So one is that immigration lawyer narrowed the niche, he developed authority within that niche itself, and was able, therefore, by the way, to charge for something that everybody else was giving away, which again makes us feel better and forms trust. One of the things also that I just want to mention here, I'm not exactly sure how I would tie it into that, but I'll bet that lawyer did this, is that when people come to see me, I will admit, for example, that I have a lot of knowledge of trust and estates planning and that I've done a lot of planning for a lot of very wealthy people, often like them, like the person sitting in front of me. But I'll say, but I am not very knowledgeable about this thing, this thing, this thing. So if you end up needing that, we're going to refer you to another firm. Or if we have expertise in our department, we're going to bring in one of those lawyers, and you're going to make sure you're comfortable with them. So admitting to a little bit of a flaw or the limitations of your skill is also very, very powerful in building trust, because then people know that you're coming clean with them, and they will assume correctly or incorrectly. So you have to use these kind of techniques.
You have to be ethical.
Yeah, you want to be ethical about it, but they'll assume that you're coming clean with most of everything.
Yep. That's huge. And I think it's a science, it's a technology of persuading. And I've done some reading on that and some study on that, and neuro-linguistic programming and all of those things. And I think really that you really can persuade people where like you mentioned there, and I think that ethics has to really come into play, because you could do some of these scarcity and damaging confessions, and let me just tell you, and have someone eating out of your hand and going, and here's what I do, and then overinflate fees and not give the service you need. And of course that's wrong, but I think it's so interesting that as as we do things, and I actually teach marketing strategy at 3 universities, and one of the classes I teach is buyer behavior and consumer buying. And it's interesting why we buy. And Paco Underhill wrote a book, and when I did my graduate work, that was one of the books we read, which is Why We Buy. And we buy for certain reasons and certain things, and sometimes we buy for status, and sometimes when we can trace it back, and I've had students put in discussion forums, oh my word, I bought this whatever, and then in our lesson this week I noticed that I bought it because of this, and that's exactly right.
Yeah, it's funny. We can use all of these skills of persuasion. and the better we get at it, the easier it is. But persuasion is still hard work. You're trying to get somebody to change the perspective from which they're viewing something and change the way they think about it. And it can be done, and it should be done ethically, which means, as you were saying, that you got to really ask them all these questions and make sure it is right for them and it is a good match, that it's going to solve their problem. So I prefer to talk about the difference between persuasion and influence. Both of these terms people think of as manipulative, and we'll talk about that in a second. But influence trumps persuasion for me all the time. But influence grows from persuasion. In other words, if we find out what somebody really needs and we ethically provide it and we exceed what we told them we were going to do and they really feel like they got more than their money's worth, and we do that pretty consistently, eventually they're going to come to trust us and know that when they have questions about our topic area, they should come to us and ask us, and they're going to get an honest answer. So now they're coming to us with the predisposition to accept whatever it is that we tell them to do. And once you become influential enough, people will start asking you questions about areas outside of your expertise. And that's when, you have to be ethically careful to get them rooted in the right direction, or to carefully research for them whatever it is that they need to make sure that you're giving them the right answer. But influence is something where people are coming to you with the preconceived notion that what you tell them they're going to do, because you have a record of treating them honestly and fairly and providing value. Persuasion is a separate skill, and it's a building block of influence. But when you stop at persuasion, you're really missing out on the best part of this skill set.
Well, because persuasion is more of the what's it going to take to get you in this car. It's the push, it's the close, it's the objections, it's the work part of it. But when you do it the right way along with influence, and it's almost like it's the push versus pull in marketing. You want the pull. You want to have so much influence and authority positioning so that people come to you, so you're pulling them in and drawing them in. And then the persuasion is light persuasion. It's just dropping a few of the little things you mentioned without being forceful, and then they don't feel like you've pushed them in anything, because everything you've said just feels right and it makes sense to them.
And influence, I guess, is built on a longer-term view than persuasion, which is awesome, or which is often viewed as, I'm going to make this sale this way, whereas influence grows over time and makes active selling less necessary, because when you come out with a product.
Did you ever read that book, The Ultimate Sales Machine by Chet Holmes?
Chet Holmes, yeah.
Yeah, a stellar book, and if anyone has not read it, boy, it's like $8-9 on Amazon. But I remember one of the stats that he mentions in the book is that 97% of your target audience is not ready to buy what you've got now, and everyone's clamoring for the 3%. So they're elbowing everybody away to get that 3%. Well, why don't you focus on maybe not the 97%, because there's a certain percent that's never going to buy anything from anybody, but there's a good 70-80% that are going to buy what you've got ultimately. So if you can become an educator and an advocate for those people and just give them what they need and educate and help them, then you're the obvious choice when they make that decision. And then let those, other people that are pushy and trying to do the unethical persuading fight over the 3% that are ready right this minute.
And that's a good distinction between push and pull, and it's a real strategic force multiplier. And then the tactical force multipliers, the way that you make that happen, will depend. And people should think about this. Who is it that I'm really going after? Let's not just go after your average client. Let's figure out what your best client or customer is buying and what they look like. Are they male or are they female? Are they 30 or are they 50? Do they own their home or do they not? Because once you figure out what your best buyers look and sound like and what their worries and their concerns are and the language they use to refer to the problem that you're solving as well as to your product, you're going to be way more capable of writing checklists, which is a lot of times where I start, by the way, is infographic or checklist to see if the topic I'm thinking matters to them really does. Does it get a lot of response or not? And only when I know that it does with that group, that niche, that population that I'm really trying to help, only then do I roll out something a little bit more complicated like a webinar or an ebook or a combination of techniques or an opt-in list where we can provide them with information or start seeding social media with it. But, really getting an understanding makes it way, 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 way easier to be both persuasive and ultimately influential.
Yeah, I love it. And you said two words that connect with me, strategy and tactics, because part of my tagline in my consulting business is strategy, tactics, and execution. Because you can have a strategy, which is the 30,000-foot view, and here's what should happen, and then you can even know some tactics, like we should do a webinar, but if you don't execute on those things, nothing happens. And you can have all these gurus say, look at this tactic, this is the best one, and no, this was the best one, and another person, but you've got to then know the strategy enough to realize what your target audience would respond to say, okay, here's where I'm comfortable doing what. I'm not really good in front of the camera, so I'm going to do a podcast, and I'm going to just nail that podcast and do every single week do a good podcast. Or I've got a selfie stick, and I take walks, and I go to crazy, interesting places. I'm going to do quick little snippets on video, and my viewers would love to see where all I'm going and my little helpful educational tips, and I'm going to do that every single day. Those tactics become then your creative output.
And people sometimes leap to, I'm really good at this, so I'm going to do Snapchat because I'm really good at video. But if they're dealing with an audience that isn't really in the world of Snapchat and is still focused on Facebook because that's where they see their grandkids' pictures, that's not going to work either. So you're right. You have to do it in a way that you're really good and play to your strength, but temper that or factor into that. Where is it that the audience that you're appealing to naturally goes for information that it trusts?
Yeah.
Use a platform they already trust because you've already broken down the barrier. It's like I often say at the start of a meeting or a negotiation, hey, before we even get started, and I drop my hands down a little bit, because what that's saying to the brain of the person that's sitting there with you is, oh, we're not even getting started yet. I don't have to be quite on guard. I don't have to put the full mask up and, have the walls up. I can relax a little bit here because we haven't even started yet.
Yeah, that's just huge. Well, I've just so much enjoyed getting to know you and just chatting. I think we just have so much in common, and it's really cool. We could just probably go on and on, but let's stop here with how can people learn more about some of your teachings and speaking and books and programs? What's the best way that they can reach out to you?
So I do post on social media, and you could follow me on Facebook.com/David Frees, Frees. The best place to go for content on sort of the strategies and tactics of how you take this information and apply it in your marketing or with your family is at successtechnologies.com/blog, B-L-O-G. And Excellent. There we put up a lot of information, about all of the different ways that people use these techniques of becoming more persuasive and becoming better negotiators and better leaders.
I love it. Thank you so much, David. It was wonderful getting to know you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.